I'll start off by doing this as one of the co-hosts of the session. I'm Shalek. I'm from MIT, the Bird and the Reagan Institute, and I'm one of the co-leaders of the HCA Equity Working Group with Partha and Musa. And we're all incredibly delighted that equity has become a large focus of the HCA and to have the opportunity to have some of these larger conversations and to think about how we can, create greater global equity with respect to representation, participation, and also with respect to benefit from the data that comes out of the HCA. And we're looking forward to having a conversation here about what opportunities and barriers exist in Asia and the kinds of things that we might be able to do as a group to help create a more inclusive, diverse, and equitable atlas. Who wants to go next? Please, Piero, all you.
Yeah, briefly introduce myself. So I'm Piero Carninci. I'm originally from Italy, but I've been in Japan for 25 years at RICAN, involved in various projects, Phantom, collaborating with ENCODE as well, and then now Human Cell Atlas and a few more things. And so I'm particularly interested, because we are in Asia, and we started this Asian community 3 years ago in a small meeting in Okinawa with something like 25 or 30 people, and it's great to see this community that is growing, and hopefully we can probably bring many more countries in Asia. Asia is really huge. It's half of the world population is in Asia, and though we have Korea, China, Japan, Singapore on board, of course Australia is on board as well. I think that we need to work much more for many more countries, and I'm looking forward to discuss here today.
Great. Christine, you're next on my list. Do you want to go?
Hi everyone, I'm Christine Wells. I'm an Australian scientist. I work in stem cell biology and genomics. I'm very interested in the equity aspects of the Human Cell Atlas project, particularly for underrepresented communities here in Australia and underrepresented countries in our region. So I'm really excited to hear about the initiatives that will help bring capability to a lot of the communities who are going to really benefit from the Human Cell Atlas program.
Thanks, Christine. Li Jiang, I apologize if I mispronounced your name.
Yes, I'm the workers. Yeah, I can help with the panelist. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to introduce yourself, where you're coming from?
Thank you. I'm from Google Ji's lab, and you guys can discuss.
Well, thank you for joining us. Angela, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, I'm Angela Wu. I'm currently in Hong Kong right now at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. I do a lot of work in single cell. I might be the only representative in the HCA. I don't even know if I'm an official representative, but I joined the HCA Asia meeting last year as well at GIS. So I think I met a number of you there last year as well. And yeah, I'm giving a talk later this afternoon, so I'm looking forward to that. And it's really great to see familiar faces.
Awesome. Rem, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Ram DasGupta from the Genome Institute of Singapore. I know some of you guys, but yeah, good to be here. So at least from the Singapore side, what we are really contributing to is in at least some of the organs, including liver, colon, and lungs, and in the diversity that's represented by the local population of Chinese, Malay, and Indians. But apart from that, of course, I mainly work on my own interest of tumor evolution, looking at the interaction between tumor and tumor environment. Yeah. All right.
Fantastic. Varodom?
Hi, everyone. My name is Varodom, and I'm at Mahidol University in Bangkok, in Thailand. So this is my second meeting joining the HCA activities. So last year I was at the equity meetings in Addis Ababa with Alex and many other people here. So since I just started my single cell work just a few years ago, and there quite only a few people doing that in Thailand. So hopefully we can contribute something from the point of view of the countries that just start the technology. Thanks.
Fantastic. Victor? You're on mute.
It's okay? Oh, okay.
It's perfect.
Okay. Great to meet you here. My name is Xinghua Pan. I work in the Southern Medical University in the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. I also start up lead the Guangdong Province Key Laboratory for single cell technology and application. Before joining this institute, I worked at Yale University. Actually, I started my work on single cell about 14 years ago. So developed some single cell technologies. And recent years, right now, I also one of the mission is start a new technology for single cell analysis, in particular epigenomics and multi-omics, including the high throughput analysis of CpG methylation and ATAC sequence. The other thing is application of the technology for a lot of study, especially many of them related to HCA. For example, one is leukemia, including AML and the AAL and the myel, MM. The second is some solid cancer, including hepatocarcinoma, colorectal cancer, and thyroid cancer, and this are supported by China Fund. So recently, actually yesterday, I present our work on osteosarcoma for the microenvironment. Actually, it's kind of cell atlas analysis. So this is my great interest. I hope to have a chance.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senjuti, do you want to go next?
Sure, thanks, Alex. I'm Senjuti. I am based in Bangladesh. I am a microbiologist or a molecular geneticist. I don't really do direct HCA work per se, but I've been working with HCA for over a year now, and that's mainly because I'm also an advocate for equity. I do a lot of work on technology transfer and specifically in the space of genomics and how LMIC should have equal access or equitable access to pathogen genomics and for local understanding of diseases. Glad to be here and waiting to hear from others. Thanks.
Great. Yulia? You're on mute.
Sorry. I'm a bioinformatician from Moscow. My group is mostly working in multi-omics integration, single cell technology, and recently we started a pilot project, preparation for a pilot project. We want to join the AIDA initiative to profile immune cells in, and now we're working in one population in southern part of Russia. And we are trying to raise some funds to cover different populations in Russia, mostly Asian and like southern parts of Russia, but hopefully at some point we will have more populations available. And that's basically that's my interest in joining this meeting.
Thanks for joining. Yishin? Okay.
He is a staff sheet. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. staff are more than welcome to join these conversations and more than welcome to introduce themselves. And one of the big things about equity is that it involves everybody. It's not just a conversation that we get to have because we're promoted to panelists. This is a conversation that's inclusive and involves people from all walks of life, not just the scientists and not just the people that are in their labs. So we are delighted to have any of you jump in. And we also respect if you would just rather be a participant and listen. Florian?
Yeah, I'm a researcher postdoc in Shell Scuba GIS. I have to sit in the big office, that's why I have to wear the mask all the time. I'm also mostly here today for technical assistance. So when the Zoom crashed, we were the ones trying to bring it back online again. So I hope it doesn't crash again.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
I'm also doing a lot of single cell work in Sham's group. So I'm quite excited to listen to what all of you guys have to say today.
Fantastic. All right, I'm just going to put one more time. If anybody wants to be promoted to a panelist and join the discussion, just please let us know. So, I think that one of the things that's been so interesting about the equity work that that many of us have been involved in with respect to the HCA is a realization that the barriers to equity are different in every region of the world. And I think that one of the things that I was most excited to stay up late and to join this conversation to learn more about were what are some of the barriers to equity and inclusion within Asia. As was pointed out by Piero, a quarter of the world's population lives in Asia, but there are a number of countries that aren't represented. I know that Varodom, you and I have talked about this before when we were in Addis. I know that one of the big things that we actually were hoping to have counted as a success at this point was a 2-week trip to Vietnam that has been postponed a year to help create greater engagement with individuals at a number of the units in that country. But I was wondering if anybody had thoughts on what were the things that were preventing greater engagement with a number of people in a number of the countries that are within the region as a place to start.
I think that if you look at North America and or if you look at Europe, of course, you have much more organization, particularly from the European Union, and we are much more connected politically and with many even more agreement with science. And in Asia, I think that political situation is still, it is definitely very, very different. We are very far from having the unity vision of Asia and in particular for science. Perhaps, I guess that this kind of project probably can help us much more than the politicians to have really a scientist-based bottom-up collaboration that will unite scientists much more than what politics can do. So I think that probably we can definitely do quite a bit to unite science and at first.
Thanks, Piero. Do others have thoughts? One of the reflections that I was thinking of as I was listening to you speak, Piero, is that in a lot of the countries that where we've spoken to individuals, the things that excite people about the HCA are different. The things that make them want to engage. Are there unifying themes? I know that what was brought up before, and that a number of you have been working on, in Asia Unitas, which is, obviously something that could unify people. But in many places, there are, local priorities that that scientists are trying to promote and they're trying to focus on, and things that disproportionately impact individuals, very often associates with disease. Are there things that you think could be unifying forces to engage people, or do you think that the messaging is different in each individual country, and that we have to recognize that we have to create local conduits to understand what that messaging should be?
Yeah, maybe I'll just chime in a little bit. I think from a Singapore perspective, as well as some of the other countries that we interact with, I think the major issue often is like you just mentioned, is the priorities of these different countries and what the governments are looking for, what to fund. So what excites the say the ministers that we talk to in terms of initially when we were talking to them in terms of like trying to get some of the HCA work funded. So if you just say normal, for example, then there is not much of excitement. Right? It has to be in the context of disease. And then of course, amongst the disease, or like let's just focus, even if you talk about cancers, there's a lot more interest in, say, funding Asian specific cancers. So even if we get, say, the tumor adjacent normal, so it'll be based on the normal that you get for the disease that's relevant to Asia. So I think, but I think once, I have to say, at least in Singapore, it appears to be changing to a certain extent. Now there are papers that are coming out and we're contributing actively. So the powers that be, they understand that, okay, it's really important to be part of this global consortium. And so there's more kind of willingness to kind of fund large programs that appear to connect with the larger global community. But I think initially there was, like I said, some hurdles based on what's perceived as priority, and which is obviously different for different countries in Asia. Yeah.
And has there been excitement? Sorry, please, Christine.
I was going to say there's a huge grassroots movement for single cell technologies here in Australia that over the last, I would say, 3 years has seen several hundred, particularly early career researchers, come together pretty frequently to exchange methods, analysis methods, hackathons, and so forth. What that community has failed to get is any kind of consensus funding from our government. So there's a lot of goodwill and a lot of interest to work together, but very little capacity to do anything outside individual labs. And I think this is a repeating theme, that you need substantial investment to get people to actually generate data together.
That's right.
I think Bangladesh is kind of the opposite of Australia in the sense that there is very little knowledge about what single cell analysis even is. What is the HCA? So I think we have to, if we were to progress this more in Southern Asia, we have to start even further back, educating people about this concept and then going from there.
Please, either. Good, Piero.
I was wondering, of course, that Bangladesh and Australia and India, they use English broadly, but I was wondering, and I would like to have a comment from other participants in non-English speaking countries. How important would be to translate in various, in the second languages, in other languages, having the website that is, I would say, in Japanese, in Chinese, in Korean, but also in many more languages, in Arabic languages. So what is the impression? Yes.
Well, that's a really, really good question, actually. The problem of language, and we have written about it a lot, and we have done surveys in the country, and how meetings are conducted, how conferences are conducted, and how participation and encouragement to attend these meetings change completely if there is some kind of local language involved in it. So I think language is extremely important, and that can start even with publication. We have shown if publications are translated, even in the supplement, if the article is actually translated, which actually a lot of articles are now translated in French and Spanish, it makes a very big difference in readers and general increase in knowledge.
So we should say to CZI to sponsor some serious translation, scientific translation company to make the essential part of the website in 20, 30, 40 different languages, I guess.
That's part of it. Varodom, sorry, who was about to speak?
Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Varodom had raised his hand. I was going to let him comment and also hear his thoughts in Thailand. And then Ram, please.
Sure. All right, thanks so much for that. I guess I'll just address 2 points. So I guess the first point about the language. So in Thailand, we also use Thai as a national language. So I would answer or touch upon Pietro's points in 2 parts. So I think in terms of academia, English is not a problem at all. So I think at the level of researchers and academics, I mean, it's not a big problem because we always communicate and like we teach even in English and anyway. So I think but if you think about like, I mean, to get to the like the grassroots, like other people who might be the subjects. So I completely agree that it's quite important to translation to get it accurately and precisely exactly what they need to know. So I think being in Asians, you can see that there are quite a wide varieties and diversity in terms of languages. So it's not like like in Europeans where you can sort of guess like from maybe Spanish and Italians. I mean, you can sort of make some guess, but that's not the case in Asia at all. So the second point that I like to touch upon, just to go back to Alex's point on what hinders why is it not like more equals or reach other peoples. So I think we have to maybe face the realities. So I think maybe Senjuti can back me up a little bit on this. So I think when we talk about Asia, it's not really just exactly the same states. So we can see, I think, from this conference as well that countries like Japan, Singapore, I would say China, maybe Hong Kong, and Australia as well. I mean, they're at different levels than the rest of Asia. So I couldn't agree more when I think it was Ram who mentioned that there's priorities. Just to quickly share, what's happening in Thailand, and I'm sure that's the case in many other developing countries as well. So priorities in terms of research usually go to something called translational research. I don't really like that word, but I guess you heard about that before. So it's basically translational versus basic research. So translational would be something that you can translate and you can sell within the next 5 years. So that would be the priorities if you expect to get the funding from the government. In terms of like any other thing, not just single cell, but I would say like other things which is fall into the categories that doing it for the better good of mankind, that they cannot say that's not important, but it's just not the priorities of these countries, I would say. But that doesn't stop us from wanting and trying to contribute to the better good like HCAs. But I think the bare reality is just that we cannot rely on the local government in that sense. Thanks. Yeah.
So great. I have some thoughts, but I'd like to hear from Ram first, please.
Maybe a couple thoughts. First, just extending on what Piero mentioned in terms of translating science into different languages. I know in India there's some effort by the Department of Biotechnology, which central government funding, and it's trying to kind of translate much of the science into different languages. Of course, India has a problem that there are probably 26 different official languages and many more. So, but however, I mean, in terms of science, I think English is not an issue. But reaching the grassroots, right, for even for even for say newspaper articles that can that can talk about some of these global efforts so people understand, and so they'll be more prone to say donating tissue for science. So that's, I think it's really important, and it's happening to a certain extent in some of the countries that I know. And the second point is, as I think Varodom just mentioned, in terms of priorities, that clearly are different. But in terms of translation as well, I mean, I've been in the American system for a very long time, about 18 years or so. I mean, at NIH grants, we used to write about translation as well. But translation in Asia is really, they want to see it something happening in 3 to 5 years. They go with 5-year plans, and in some of the countries, they actively want to see your findings somehow translating into the clinic or to the society within a fairly short period of time. So that then kind of really limits the kind of very fundamental discovery biology in some ways. But not that we all still do it. It's just the way you can recruit funding for the kind of work that you want to do. Yeah,
it's interesting. Sorry, Yulia, you wanted to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah. Actually, I just want to add a few things. First, about the translation. In Russia, English is also not a problem in academia, but for the rest of the community, I think English is still, very rarely spoken. And in terms of, for example, even like for the government or for the like agencies which provide funds, local funds, I think it would be really important if they have something which is like international, but also translated into Russian so they can understand what's going on there. And in terms of translation to clinic or whatever, I think in Russia we are also under like huge pressure to have something like within 3 years, because typical period or grant period is 3 years here, maybe 4, like best. So you have like a lot of chances, well, a lot more chances to get funded if you have some idea which can be translated into clinic diagnostics or whatever in like 3 years, which is definitely like in contradiction with the basic research. But at the same time, I think if there is kind of clearly um, written policy how we actually what are the direction of the translation of this research, human salatus research, into different areas of the like clinic or maybe diagnostics or something else. If we have this policy somewhere written and like explicit, I think it would help everyone in different countries to apply for funds, because this is kind of like a community effort. So we know that there is some part of the basic research, but also there are some areas where we expect to have some breakthroughs, which may lead to some results in like a fairly short period of time. So I think these kind of things would help, yeah, a lot.
So there are a lot of super interesting things that just came up in that conversation. Translation is something that we've thought about a lot. And, I think that translation is important for a number of reasons. One is to make the science accessible. And, I think that's something we should discuss about how to prioritize that. I also think this idea of translating the science to local funders and local governmental agencies to generate support is incredibly important. The one thing that I was questioning as I was listening to each of you is I was trying to understand, how does the lack of accessibility of some of this information impact career trajectories? So how important is translation to actually bringing people into science, to getting them more involved as we think about equity and we think about training? That was one thing that I'd love to hear thoughts on. The other thing that's funny is, Varodom, to hear you talk about how different the ability to execute on science is, or the funding for science in different countries in Asia. Little known fact, it's the same in the United States. If anything's been laid bare by the COVID pandemic, it's how different the different states are and the different institutes and their ability to react rapidly. And actually, in some places, we've been better able to do collaborations with international partners in sub-Saharan Africa than we've been able to do it with people, in the South and the US. So I think there's a lot to do more broadly, both within our own backyard and, all around the world. The one thing that I was also curious about is, we're talking about translation, and I was thinking more broadly about educational materials too. What is the, we've, Tracy and a number of others at HCA have been fantastic, and they've taken some materials and created a new page for education on the HCA website. How important is it to get some of that into multiple different languages? I know that, Senjuti, you had brought up the importance of doing some of these things. We've talked a lot about roadshows. We did a roadshow in Brazil. We were supposed to do one in Vietnam. I'm trying to think about, what is the importance of getting some of this into other languages to create sort of that engagement. And the one last thing, I know I'm throwing a lot at you very quickly, but another thing we've talked a lot about in the past that's very different from what I'm hearing here is about the importance of getting pilot money to seed data so that people could show that they could actually engage. I was just on a call with a number of people in Latin America, in Brazil, where they were talking about the importance of generating some data so that when they applied to calls, that it looked as though they could generate exactly the same data and they were in a position to deliver, because that was one of the major criticisms they got. And it sounds like that's not necessarily the issue in the grants for a number of you. It sounds like maybe what's needed is a companion grant that supports some of the basic science that goes along with some of the translational science that needs to happen. And it's a model that I had never thought of because it's very different here, but I'm wondering, is that something that resonates to you? Is the ask in a number of the Asian countries for funders, for CCI or the Gates Foundation or whoever might be interested in contributing, that we need parallel funds or supplementary funding that would support some basic science to go with the translational things. Because I mean, sounds obvious to me now, but I'd never thought of it. So I'd love to hear some thoughts on that as well.
Okay.
Go ahead, Angela.
Yeah, maybe I haven't said anything yet because I'm just seeing what everybody else has to say. I think in Hong Kong, I mean, so we're a small place, we're not a country. And I think the challenges are similar, but there are some places that are different. So funding wise, our funding amounts are kind of small for individual PIs. So it's definitely poses a problem. Like for me, there are not that many people who are interested in doing sort of broad survey single cell profiling projects. They all kind of want to focus on their own science, you know, the area that they're established. And so they don't really want to do these survey projects because for them, it's like, they don't feel like they get much out of it. If someone like me wants to do it, then it's really difficult to get a large amount of funding. The other one is the incentive structure. So my university does not have a hospital associated with it. So I have to collaborate with other clinicians. And I think the incentive for clinicians in Hong Kong to participate in this kind of research is not that strong, unless they're also research professors at like the home institution. So for me, also that's been challenging to find collaborators who are willing to, clinical collaborators who are willing to like take the samples the way you want them and then be really proactive in recruiting patients, because that's a lot of effort for them. So on the funding side, that also helps if you have some funding to help the clinical researcher to like pay for their staff or recruit additional staff to do that stuff. Otherwise, the incentive is a little bit weak. So that's just something additional from Hong Kong that I've noticed.
So how do you think about facilitating collaboration then in some of the things that you do? I mean, one of the big things about this is collaboration, and there's the Asian Immune Atlas, but what are the barriers to creating sort of this transnational collaboration that is, you know, so core to the idea of HCA?
I mean, I think what you just mentioned about promotional materials or some kind of like showcasing of what this kind of effort can do for the clinical community will be helpful. And then like drawing out that roadmap of how it gets to the translational part, I think the clinical researchers will care a lot more about that. Like they're much more incentivized to do things like clinical trials. So if you do an atlas and it, you know, brings up drug candidates that they can then take to do a clinical trial, that aligns the incentives a lot better than saying, oh, we're going to do basic science with it. So I see get people on the clinical side get more enthusiastic about that.
Very cool.
Okay, so another question I think that comes up in a lot of these meetings, and perhaps is a good segue to that too, this collaboration with other hospitals or clinics, is data sharing. The data that you're generating, you know, we often advocate for open access to data, but what does that mean to the panelists here? What does open access really mean to you? And how open are you to sharing the data that's generated from your projects, let's say immediately right after the project? Do you see barriers? Would you want to do that, or would you want more time before data sharing?
It's a practice to put everything in the public domain straight away. We're really happy to provide data and code to anyone. We're working on building containers to make it easier to launch software without having to get all the dependencies together. And it's an important part of our approach to science.
Thanks, Christine. So sometimes some scientists, specifically from low middle income countries who are just starting out generating data, genetic data, will say that, you know, we are generating the data, the funder has asked us to make everything open immediately, but we need some time with the data to learn how to analyze it. And, you know, because a lot of these groups don't have the infrastructure, the computational power, or the intellectual infrastructure to actually be able to analyze all the data in real time. And sometimes when everything is made open access, our data can also be taken out of context and published and presented. Is there anyone who thinks that way or would argue against or for?
I'll just echo the last point. We, thanks to CCI, had the opportunity to generate some data on COVID, and one of the things that we fretted about most was how to write. We wanted to release the data, but how to write the caveats, concerns, and things that people had to look at so the data was put in the right context. One thing that I'm interested in response to what you're saying, Senjuti, is I totally believe in equity of data benefit, and what I still am trying to understand from this, going back to some of the educational comments that have come up before, is the ideal for the generation of data and for sort of local running of the data? Is it to empower locals to run the data, or is it to create equal partnerships where you're actually working with people in each region to actually promote things? And so to clarify what I mean by that a little bit more, would the ideal thing for you, just to use me as a straw person, be for us to form a collaboration and for my team to work with your team, treating everybody on your side as equal partners, publishing equally, and to helping you get that data out there and training you in the process? Or is there an element of empowerment that where you prefer that you get trained and then have the opportunity to do it yourself? I mean, I'm just trying to understand what the ideal model here is. Does that make sense? Because I'm trying to think about what is going to be the educational model that would actually create equity.
I think the educational model should be actually training, because we also want to look at long term, right? When a group in MIT and let's say a group in a very medium region in India or in Bangladesh is seen as an equal partner, and it's difficult to actually move forward equally, because we know it's not about equality, it's about equity. From so much lower than someone in MIT, starting from language to access to resources to experience to education. So I think when projects are planned out, it's really important to keep in mind that I'm working with partners who don't start equal. So there has to be things written out right at the beginning of how I will facilitate training. And that I think also brings in incentives, because oftentimes incentives in academics, let's say me working with someone in MIT, their incentive will be, or incentive for the next grant will be, how am I publishing? What journal am I publishing in? What will my promotion depend on? But like, we also have to think about the incentive structure. If you are coming to Bangladesh and helping a team and helping build capacity, how are you incentivized? That. So I think there are both sides to it, right? Like, it's not like you will just do everything, a group coming in from Global North and just give everything away to Global South. That's not going to work either. So there has to be some kind of bilateral benefits.
Yeah, I think that I totally hear you. Though I obviously would give you anything you wanted. But that said, I think that this idea of context and understanding of the problems, right, the opportunity to have impact, to translate, are things that you can't do, and you can't do without people that understand the clinical realities and the problems. And the question is, and I think that this is something that comes up for me a lot. There is an inequity that I can see, to your point, in terms of access to reagents, access to computational infrastructure, but there's also an inequity in the other direction in terms of knowledge that's domain specific. And so the question is, how do you support both sides and create equitable partnerships in both directions? And I still hear you. I hear you about this training element. What I still don't understand is our goal at the end of the day to work together as a community towards some of these things and to create equitable partnerships, or is really the goal to create local knowledge and then leave it with the regions with the opportunity to empower themselves and to keep things going? I'm trying to figure out just more in terms of how we create infrastructure to do this. What is the role of ongoing connectivity? Are we starting it and then connecting it to the HCA more broadly? What does the commitment look like? And maybe I didn't articulate that well enough, but that's what I'm sort of trying to figure out here as we think about, what does the equity working group have to do to engage Bangladesh or to engage Thailand, or some of the local single cell people who are in places that are already established, like in Japan or in Singapore. What do they have to do to to make equity work.
Alex, is it quite that binary? You know, you can reach out to partner with training, and then organic partnerships form which are driven by people rather than necessarily policy.
I completely agree. I worry though that in some places, something that constantly comes up is funding and translation and education. And I completely agree with you, Christine, but what I'm trying to figure out is, where do we start? Like, you know, I've had a lot of conversations with a number of people about where we start and what do we need to do. And that's what I'm always struck with, you know, is the complexity of it. What is the first thing that we can do? Is what we need right now to take our time to go translate everything that already exists in the HCA? Do we need to pull everything together that exists in English and put it in a site where it's accessible? Do we have to pick a couple places where we go build lasting partnerships that become hubs within the region? And, you know, particularly as I think about Asia compared to when I was thinking about Latin America with Musa and Partha and with many members of the Equity Working Group, you know, what is it that stops somebody like Singapore or Japan from being a hub that creates, you know, scientific equity within the region, the way in which we would have thought about someplace like, University of Sao Paulo doing it in Brazil and for Chile, or, you know, Ghana doing it for West Africa, and, you know, and so what I'm trying to understand in a lot of ways is, what are the differences here? You know, and I'm ignorant of it, so that's why I'm asking the question. What is it that stops it? Sorry, Angela, please go ahead.
So I want to bring in an example from a different organization. So we, Hong Kong, we just established a epigenomics consortium in Hong Kong, and this is part of the global, what do you call it, IHEC consortium. And like in the first 2 years, I think we kind of did our own thing and then contributed like on the side if whatever we did could contribute, but nothing really specifically for the IHEC. But then 2 years ago, like one of our members, Danny, he's really enthusiastic about it. And so he went out and got a private donation for EpiHK and then gave that money out to the researchers in Epi Hong Kong, partially as seed funding. And then the other part, if they committed to do like part of the consortium agreed upon sort of survey data sets, they could also apply for this other small seed funding that they could use freely, like for whatever project they wanted. So for me, at least as a junior person, like it was a great thing, because, you know, I didn't mind doing the consortium project as long as I got like my little piece of thing that I could do otherwise, which actually ended up being single cell work anyway. And Danny, being a person who had the initiative to drive that, I think pushed the EpiHK effort forward by a lot. So I mean, it sounds so terrible to say that really a lot of times, at least in Hong Kong, I feel like it's about the money. If you have the money to do something, people will do work, as long as you have also that one person or that two people who are, you know, officially kind of connected to the global network, and they're really proactive about grabbing in the other people and, you know, sort of checking in on them to make sure they're meeting milestones and stuff. So I think that helps a lot. And I see that, you know, for the IHEC consortium, like our nearby neighbors like Korea, they have a lot of funding on their own, but not designated for that. And so actually, I don't think they've made as much progress as we have in the past 2 years. So, you know, just throwing that out there as a model that seems to be working for now, at least.
Please.
Right, yeah, so there are quite a few points that I like to touch upon, so I try to make it backward. So can I just go back quickly on Alex's point on trainings, on training plus collaborations. So I think personally, I don't think there's nothing wrong with collaborations at the beginning at all. I mean, talking about, you know, like these hub countries and maybe emerging countries like Thailand and other countries. But I think one thing that I learned from the meetings in Ethiopia, I mean, where many of you guys were there as well. So I think my feeling is that, you know, people there, they're kind of quite reserved, and you know, maybe just a little bit of worries about, like, you know, like this, you know, big countries coming in and, you know, to take their properties or, you know, like their sample and so on without getting something back to them. So I think in the end, it come down to something like trust, for example. So I think basically, as long as you convince them, right? If you can convince them that what they're gonna get, you know, out of it is fair and equal, I think that would be fine. So in long term, I see this as a, maybe at the beginning, collaboration would be the best, because I think trainings, like, like a week trainings and then you guys go away. I mean, that might not work in long run. So I think long-term collaborations would suit best. But that also would resonate, what's the, groups in the US or the UK or other country would get, out of this as well, because not, I don't know, Alex would probably be happy to help everyone, like, without thinking about what he's going to get, but not everyone is like Alex. So you probably have to think about, like what other groups are willing to get from helping and training, this group in other countries as well. And also I can I just go back to the previous questions on the data sharings. So I completely agree with Christine in terms of like, I mean, if data means like, codes and, like program or something like that, I agree that, that's something that we come up with ourselves. We should make it available on GitHub and so on. That shouldn't be a problem. What I'm a bit more worried, and actually I'm not expert on this at all, and I like to ask for your advice is, if we're dealing with individuals samples, so basically patient or donor samples, this is something that we find quite tricky. So I think even yesterday when Sarah Teichmann talked about one of the COVID-19 papers, I think she got asked about, how could they make sure that, the patients or donors data would be, kept, I don't know, like secure and private. So what I learned from that is just that if you, as long as you share something like, matrices, like, cell by genes data, that's something that cannot be traced back to the origin, that would be fine. But then, but I don't know, like, this is, maybe something, I hope it's in the context still, but if you think about, this Suchisphere case where, like you have this metadata, but then you cannot trace back, to verify that it's really come from someone. I don't know how reliable that data would be. So I'd like to, not to, like raise another issues, but ask for your guys' opinion. What's the balance between, having the legitimate, traceable data that you can verify, but then, you have to keep the patient and donors data secure, if that makes sense.
It does, and it's a fantastic question, and something that we spend a lot of time talking to the ethics working group about as well. I'm happy to talk about it, and the issue is that the anonymized matrices very often miss the metadata. So going back to what Senjuti brought up, very often you could be saying things that are taken out of context that would be problematic. Like at least in COVID, time since hospitalization is driving a lot of signal in the data and the amount of viral reads you get. So figuring out how to give the right amount of metadata and keep it anonymized is not trivial. One thing I want to pull on right there that you said, and I want to kick this over to Christine, is this idea of trust and building relationships. And I completely agree. Partha, Musa, and I just wrote this piece where we said, really our role as people that are in the global north is that we have to give trust early and work hard to earn it. But the other thing that comes up is this idea of relationships. And what I still don't understand and what I'm trying to figure out is the relationship lab to lab, or how do we create relationships with the HCA more broadly? And how do you create those relationships with the community? And what is the right model? And maybe it's a mixture of both, and maybe it depends upon individuals. But as you're trying to think about how to create structures to reach that, do people have thoughts on where you start? Do we have to make the connectivity with the HCA, or do we have to have individual labs within the HCA that want to be components of this, be those hubs that pull people in, maybe by a degree of separation to start?
This is something that Phantom did really fantastically in Japan, right from the early days of the human genome. And part of it was physically bringing people together so that there was that opportunity to form relationships. Part of it was a sense of learning together. And so there was a lot that was unknown, particularly in the early days. But even now, I suspect, Piero, there's a lot of learning on your feet. And a lot of energy from postdocs and students coming to the table and actually forming a lot of the bridges between individual labs. And some of those relationships remain very, very strong, even 10 years after one of the projects started. So you can't underestimate the usefulness of getting people out of their labs into one site to talk about science, cutting edge science, and then providing them with, I guess, data, which is the other thing that Phantom did to work on. And so it was a centralised data model, but it was an extremely effective one at relationship building too. Piero, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, thank you for citing the Phantom. It's difficult to say why it worked so well, but probably I guess it was it involved many labs that were smaller around the data set, and we have no idea how to analyze that data because it was much bigger than what we could possibly figure out. And I guess putting the energy of young bioinformaticians was really helpful. I think that if you look at 10 or 15 years after that, many of those young bioinformaticians are now group leaders in various places of the world, including Australia and many European countries where they go back, the US and so on. I think that this kind of training by learning using the data set and in a very sharing mood has been helping quite a bit to create a new class of has created the field, has created many bioinformaticians. And probably we should think how we can have those gathering that are not only 1 or 2 days for presentation, but perhaps more train-based meetings where all the people will gather once the COVID-19 will be finally over, but people will gather to analyze data, maybe around some specific problem. Maybe we could be some meeting, some Asian countries that didn't have the meeting so far to analyze all together a specific Asian data set or data sets, including all the students that are there. People when they stay for young people can stay for 1 or 2 weeks somewhere to analyze data, go back and reanalyze. So there were many reiterations and a lot of learning with the community that originally did not really know so much about that. It was also very useful for the bioinformaticians from Japan as well.
Who brought together that community? Was it a grassroots student-led initiative? Was it PIs that connected people that took over? I'm just trying to understand, is there this source of people that are already inspired that we need to bring?
Mostly it was my former boss, Yoshide Hayashizaki, and in internal discussion at Riken with Yasushi Okazaki and myself at a certain point, we saw the Drosophila jamboree, probably the first gene annotation, then we say maybe we should do something about it, but we don't have so many friends. Okay, let's start to call everybody we know and let's start to make new friends. And then we really started to call people that we did not know before, and it was really fun to collect a consortium. Everybody came to Japan. Our staff didn't almost speak any English, and it was really few days of panic at the beginning. But we figured out how to make sense of 1,000 and 1,000 full-length cDNAs before the genome was even available. So and try to explore this dark matter. And the non-coding RNA came out, and a lot of things came out by brainstorming. But we had quite a long meetings. And, the first meeting was actually 2 weeks, 2 weeks, including evening sessions to discuss overnight programming sessions by some of the young guys in our organization. Takeya Kasukawa was one of them.
So some of the questions about metadata and how you protect the integrity and trust in the files, that might not be something that has to be solved at the level of HCA, but it might be something that the collective can more creatively solve just by having to work on the data and work physically through those problems.
I think if I may interject here, there are, Alex, if in our head, we always have this idea that everything needs to be unified or there needs to be one theme. I don't think that is ever going to happen. I think every country or even within countries, like, Ram was talking about India with 29 official languages, at least, how it is going to be different for every country, and we just have to start somewhere. We can be looking for models. There are anecdotal models that has worked in certain places. We don't know if they're going to work somewhere else or not. So let's say in HCA, we are talking about this model today in Japan that worked, but this is not the first time people are trying to increase knowledge or increase education, right? When basic microbiology labs were, let's say, built out throughout the world, when WHO was trying to do basic surveillance on finding bacteria that infect, let's say, most of the children's population, they also had to start somewhere. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are many things that have already been done before. For pathogen genomics, a lot of work has already been done. And I sit in a lot of these meetings, and it's like every time we are trying to reinvent the wheel, we don't really have to. I think we just have to start somewhere, work with some other genomics group or other bigger communities like the WHO and the CDC and Wellcome Trust, who has labs all around the world, and they have figured out a way of working together. So when these basic microbiology labs were set up, at that point, it was the same problem, because doing PCR was so difficult. People did not think PCR is going to be a thing that all labs are going to start using to detect viruses. Or now 80 labs in Bangladesh does COVID testing when only one lab started out. So, they have built these centralized programs of just QC. First, there are groups for training who have nothing personal to gain out of it. That's a WHO has hired a group who just train on basic microbiology. And then there are these yearly evaluations, or we call them QA/QC, where centralized from the UK, they will send samples to different countries. They test them, do some analysis, and give the results back. And then at the end of that test, you get an evaluation of how the lab performed. I think those are things we can think about, but at the same time, remembering that we will probably not have one thing that is going to work. We just have to start somewhere and see where it takes us. You were also talking about, do we start with translating? Do we start with making educational material? I don't think anybody knows that answer. I don't think we don't know whether it's going to work or not. We just need to be like, okay, these are the easiest things. These are 5 things that we can do. Let's just do it and see what happens.
Totally and fully agree. And I completely agree that, it's going to be a different solution everywhere. The question just becomes, at least when we think about Asia, do we think about countries? Do we think about small little blocks of regions? That's what I don't understand yet. And if we think about what we need to create, is it that we need something in Bangladesh and that we need something, right next door, in, northeastern India, for example, or, how do we think about that? And it just changes how I personally would think about trying to stage this and trying to support it, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. Sorry, Ram, did you want to say something?
Yeah, maybe just a quick point. So going back to, I guess, what Alex was initially mentioning. So does it start with lab to lab, or do you need something like a HCA or WHO, like you pointed out, to bring different groups together? I'll give you an example of what has worked, I think, for liver, because we are part of the CZI funded Liver Atlas, right, HCA. So it was really basically looking out to all the people who are kind of working on liver or interested in some kind of liver disease or whatever, and just organically it came together. But, and this also echoes Angela's point, right? You need to have some funding so that even if it's small amount, that you could do something that benefits you, and then you contribute it towards a larger goal of HCA. But because of that, right, I guess, many of us liver labs came together. across whatever North America, Europe, Asia. And now what's been happening, and so we're all contributing to the Liver Atlas. Of course, part of Singapore is that we are contributing to the Liver Diversity Atlas. But now what's happened is now, every month, of course, we have these meetings, right, amongst the group, and now it's organically also generating several lab-to-lab collaborations, right? And so, and which then again, kind of, again, so it started off with this group and everybody's contributing, but then people on, within the group, we are realizing, okay, there are more interest amongst few different labs on specific questions, say progression of liver disease or whatever. And then we are starting to kind of build new collaborations, based on new questions that we want to ask. And then again, trying to include others. And there's something that, in the context of Thailand as well, I mean, cholangiocarcinoma is a huge issue in Thailand, and Thailand is not represented necessarily in liver. And we do talk about this, which is bringing it out here, that it's just that in the next round of funding, if we were to kind of expand this is something that we need to identify individuals or groups, say Thailand. Some of it is just knowledge, that whether we even know the people who need to be included, right? But then we reach out and then then form a larger group, a more inclusive group, which can then continue to work on this larger problem. So just an example of how we came together. But I think it really started off with something like HCA or maybe like WHO that brings people together first, and everybody needs to find something that's beneficial to them. Otherwise, just doesn't work, right? And that's how it starts. But then I think it just spawns many new collaborations and larger collaborative framework on that. Yeah.
Right. So let's say there was a scenario where CCI said, we have this pool of money, and Alex, see if we can bring this up. We have this pool of money and we will be only giving it to groups where 2 to 3 groups come together from one from Global North, one from Global South. Only if they come together and bring their interests together will we fund this opportunity. HCA or CCI will not be selecting any groups, but we will publicize, advertise that grant and see which teams come together and apply. And because it's going to be very difficult to us in a biased way, finding out who is interested in what. But having a call like that might be important. It has worked really well for developing pathogen sequencing in some of these countries.
So I had a question, and maybe I just have to go do the homework on this. I'm interested in the training that's done by the WHO, that's totally independent, where they have people that come in and that are funded to do this. What was the genesis of that? Who supported that? How do you get something like that set up? I mean, if that's, it sounds like a great mechanism. I'm just trying to figure out, how do we sell it?
Right.
Or how was it sold?
I don't know what the genesis of that was, but I know that WHO right now coordinates more than 140 labs in 51 different countries, and they do basic surveillance. But WHO very, very closely collaborates with CDC. So WHO will come up with guidelines or determine which are the surveillance that are important and which are the pathogens that are important. And CDC has very good lab infrastructure. So CDC will be like, okay, then we will train. And every year they will have actually a few training programs where for free, they will bring in people for a week, starting from technician level to very high postdoctoral level, and just train them for a week. And then there is exchange between them too. And then they go home with those friends that they have made at the CDC. So people usually go to Atlanta and communicate with each other, and CDC, WHO keep in touch with us or with all the labs through this QC administrator, for the lack of a better word, who sits in the UK. At the same time, actually, WHO has also figured out a lot of the ways of getting over the resource problems or getting access to reagents. So what WHO has also done is worked with local governments or local WHO offices and said that, we will send you directly reagents and supplies so that labs don't have to fight for them or clear customs, because WHO offices have, a lot of privilege. They can clear customs and directly get all the reagents to the door of the labs. This has been working very smoothly. I mean, WHO is very slow and very bureaucratic. That's a different story, but they have at least made an infrastructure for other people to come in. So now a lot of the resources, if WHO can't send us directly, CDC will send these labs directly. And when CDC needs money, they can go to the Gates Foundation, be like, we want to support these labs. You don't need to give money directly to them, just give the money to CDC or give the money to WHO. We procure the reagents and send them. So somehow it's been working well. And also lab leads get together every year at the WHO and talk about this.
Face to face makes such a difference, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's super interesting. I have to think about, I'm in the back of my mind, I'm trying to figure out if this runs into the same problem as translation. Does it have to be, very directly related, or can we find a mechanism to do this for basic science? But it's something that I can think about and that I can ask some questions about, and maybe you can as well. We're getting close to a time. We have about 5 minutes left. Are there any specific topics that anybody wanted to discuss? One of the big things that we hadn't touched on was the idea of how to create research capacity and infrastructure. I mean, I think that in a lot of the conversations we've had so far, we've taken for granted that that capacity and infrastructure exists. Other than some of the comments that you made, Judy, I'm just wondering, how big of a barrier is that? How much is that the thing we need to tackle, or is really the collaboration, education, and support for basic science, even as a pilot, really what we're looking for, and that's the barrier, or a major barrier, and a place to start?
If I may open this for others, what I think, I am a big advocate of starting everything at the level of education and knowledge, because I think that's the only way we can make things sustainable. We can have a 3-year translational goal, but at the end of the day, nothing will be sustainable unless we are, changing the syllabi, or, getting young people involved and getting them interested in genomics as a whole or single cell analysis. And that has become so obvious during COVID, right? Countries, it's not like all labs were doing COVID sequencing, SARS-CoV-2 sequencing or COVID testing, because they had training, because they had infrastructure, because they had capacity, they could move towards becoming part of the scientific community fighting COVID. So I think this might be our time to actually bring that as an example and be like, we want to exchange knowledge, bring genomics into education, preparing for what's coming next to make it sustainable, at the same time as byproduct have some kind of translation perhaps. But in my head, everything should start with education.
I agree. And it feels like there's never been a time where the right level of education that is accessible to the broad community and to younger scientists, it feels like it's never been more important. And so you know where I fall on that one. What do others think? And let me ask a slightly different question, because maybe we can constrain this. Where do we start with education? Is it the 2-week workshop like we talked about doing in these things that we've been calling roadshows, like we did in Latin America and that we're planning to do in Vietnam? Is it collating resources that everybody's created around the world and making those accessible, particularly in a time where travel is hard? What is the role of student exchange? What is it? All of it? And sometimes one, sometimes the other. Obviously the answer, but what's the first step? What's a first step?
I've just written an email to Varodom, and I'm happy to reach out to others as well. I think there's a lot of appetite in Australia around training, and COVID has forced us to do a lot online. So we already started to put together the data sets and resources in packages that are easy for people to get to. We're running an annual conference as a series of webinars, for example, and I don't think it would be very hard to extend that to other countries in other languages, other time zones. Could be a good way to start that network. So maybe the first point from my perspective is just to have a more direct conversation with some of you about what do you need, how can we help?
I think one of the big things would be to capitalize on the work that you and others are doing. And I mean, I think that one of the biggest missed opportunities is there are a number of people that are doing these great things, but they're not accessible. And particularly in this time when they're being done remotely and they're being recorded, there's, to me, one of the biggest gaps is that we haven't created a good place to house all this educational material. It seems like something that we should be tackling really quickly, particularly when we can't go anywhere. Sorry, Varodom, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, just to try to answer Alex's questions. So I agree with, yes, I pick up 3 things that you mentioned. So I agree that my priority would be, to have like a online learning tools, like repository that, people can access and learn by themselves, because I think that's going to be quite long lasting. And then I think the second bit is the roadshow thing. I think that for me, that would be the sort of like midterm solutions, because I mean, if you have the, the resources, but not being there in person is sometimes is quite difficult to catch the attention. And the long-term one would be, to have this so-called like exchange student and so on, because I think that would be would allow the collaborations to go on. So I think, yeah, we need all these things, but maybe my priority would be, as I mentioned. Yeah.
Well, as you know, I'm looking forward to coming to Thailand. I was supposed to be there right when COVID hit.
Is there any updates? So not quite.
Not yet. I know I'm not allowed to travel on MIT until at least the start of the new year, so we'll see where stuff goes. I know we're at time. I know that we're at time. Does anybody have any last comments they want to make?
Yeah, well, can I add something?
Please.
Yeah, I agree that it would be really nice to have kind of online practical courses for the data analysis, for example, and this will really benefit the community because there is a huge lack of people who can analyze the data, single cell data, I mean, in like professional way, not just running the standard pipeline, but also understanding what's going on inside. But I at this point, I think I would the community will really benefit from like student exchange, because one of the key points is motivation of the young student. As Piero mentioned, that actually the energy of young students is what is moving forward actually a lot of areas in science. And this motivation, I think it's actually now it's kind of getting low because of isolation, because young people, they really get excited because they move to different environment and then because they meet new people. And I think this is a really important part. And I think now we are not really focusing on that. And this will really help. Well, of course, in parallel with creating like online courses and these kind of things, but as soon as we are able to move from one place to another, student exchange programs will really help. I'm pretty sure about that.
Yeah, I agree. And Senjuti knows this, but there's one that MIT hosts. And if anybody ever wants to do one of those, let me know.
Sure.
We have to apply for it. They don't come for free, but we've done a lot of them. They've created a lot of partnerships that have been great.
Great.
I see we're 2 minutes past, and I don't want to keep us too long. I want to thank all of you for joining. I know that some of you, it's the middle of the morning, and I mean like literally the middle of the morning. Senjuti, some of you, it's lunchtime. Some of us, like me, are probably going to bed in a minute. But thank you all for joining, and thank you all for your partnership in this. And I agree that there's no best place to start, and sometimes you just have to do stuff. But it's always good to hear what other people have to say instead of just picking something at random. But if any of you all are interested in this, I know some of you are active parts of the equity working group and have been involved in some of the meetings. Always love to chat, always love to partner and to learn what people have done in the past. So thank you. Senjuti, did you want to say anything to close?
No, it is always like every time we come into these meetings about equity, and we just learn so much, and we realize that the experiences of every person is so unique, and we need to respect that, and also remember that when we speak, in no way are we representing a region or a country or even perhaps an institution, right? Always acknowledging that we have our own scientific biases, but at the same time, we also, as you said, we also have to start there acknowledging our biases and privilege.
This is why, to your point, education is the place to start to me, and bidirectional education. Yeah, that's why I'm here. I'm trying to learn, and I think we just need to bring more people to the table. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Conversation.
Lovely meeting you all.
Thank you. Take care.
See you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.